In 1994, the state of New York closed Pilgrim State Psychiatric Center. Over 3 months, they released 13,000 patients. Some went to group homes. Some returned to families who no longer recognized them. Most simply vanished. Where they went, nobody knows. This was not just any hospital. Pilgrim State was the largest mental health facility ever built in America. At its peak, 14,000 patients lived within its walls. The main building stretched a quarter-mile long. The campus covered 825 acres of Long Island farmland. It had been designed as a model of progressive psychiatry, a place where the mentally ill would find healing through fresh air, work therapy, and dignified care. The architects drew inspiration from European sanatoria, grand buildings surrounded by gardens, where patients could recover in beauty and peace. By the time it closed, Pilgrim State had become something else entirely. A warehouse for the forgotten. A place where doctors performed over 2,000 lobotomies, where patients died in numbers the state never fully accounted for, where the promise of healing became a century of harm. To understand how this happened, we need to go back to when it all began. In 1931, New York opened Pilgrim State Hospital with genuine optimism. The Great Depression had just begun, but the state invested $15 million, over $280 million in today's money, into this project. The design followed the Kirkbride Plan, named after physician Thomas Kirkbride, who believed architecture could cure mental illness. Long wings extended from a central administration building, each ward receiving maximum sunlight and fresh air. Patients were housed according to the severity of their illness. The quietest patients were placed in the furthest wings, and the most disturbed were closer to supervision. The campus was self-sufficient. There was a working farm where patients grew their own food and a power plant that generated electricity for all 100 buildings. Tennis courts, baseball fields, and acres of landscaped gardens surrounded the grounds. From the outside, Pilgrim State looked like a college campus, not a hospital. The staff spoke of moral treatment, a philosophy that mental illness could be cured through routine, productive work, and humane conditions. Patients would tend gardens, work in kitchens, and participate in their own recovery. In those early years, the approach seemed to work. Families praised the facility. Local newspapers wrote glowing reports about the progressive treatment methods. This was the future of psychiatric care. But almost immediately, the reality began to differ from the vision. Pilgrim State had been designed to house 10,000 patients. By 1943, overcrowding pushed that number to 14,000, 40% beyond capacity. The beautiful private rooms became dormitories with beds inches apart. Patients who were supposed to receive individual therapy sat in day rooms for hours with nothing to do. The staff shortage was catastrophic. World War II pulled doctors and nurses into military service. On night shifts, a single nurse supervised 100 patients. Individual treatment became impossible. The focus shifted from care to containment. The farm work that was supposed to be therapeutic became forced labor. Patients worked dawn to dusk for no pay, maintaining the grounds and feeding an institution that offered them little in return. By 1945, Pilgrim State had stopped being a hospital. It had become a city of the forgotten, where families sent relatives they could not handle, and doctors struggled just to keep order. As conditions worsened, doctors began looking for faster solutions. When patients became agitated, as many did in those conditions, the first response was restraint. Straitjackets kept patients immobile for hours, sometimes days. Leather straps bound them to beds. Solitary confinement cells, bare concrete rooms with a drain in the floor, held those deemed most dangerous. Hydrotherapy was considered humane. Patients were placed in tubs of ice-cold water for hours. The shock meant to calm them. Others were wrapped in wet sheets that tightened as they dried, creating a sensation of suffocation meant to induce compliance. One patient, a woman committed in her 20s for what was called hysteria, spent 6 consecutive months in restraints. Her crime was talking back to a nurse. By the 1940s, psychiatry believed it had found better tools. Insulin shock therapy involved injecting patients with massive doses of insulin, dropping their blood sugar until they fell into comas. Doctors believed these induced seizures would reset the brain. Many patients died during the procedure. Others suffered permanent brain damage. Electroshock therapy arrived next. At Pilgrim State, it was administered without anesthesia or muscle relaxants. Patients were strapped to tables and shocked with enough electricity to cause violent convulsions. Bones broke, teeth shattered, memory vanished. When Thorazine became available in 1954, it seemed like a miracle, a pill that could calm even the most agitated patient. But at Pilgrim State, it became a tool for Thorazine and control, not treatment. Patients were kept in a chemical fog, too sedated to cause trouble, too numb to do anything else. The worst was yet to come. Between 1946 and 1956, doctors at Pilgrim State performed over 2,000 lobotomies. The procedure was simple, brutal, and permanent. An ice pick-like instrument was inserted through the eye socket, pushed up into the brain, then swept from side to sever connections in the frontal lobe. The entire surgery took 10 to 15 minutes. Most patients received only local anesthesia. Doctors claimed a 70% success rate. By success, they meant the patient became quieter, more manageable, less trouble. What they did not mention was that most lobotomy patients were left permanently docile, their personalities erased, their capacity for independent thought destroyed. Some never woke from the procedure. Others lived for decades as shadows of who they had been, unable to work, unable to care for themselves, unable to remember what they had lost. The doctors who performed these surgeries believed they were helping. They published papers, they received awards, they genuinely thought they were curing disease. They were destroying lives. Pilgrim State's official records show thousands of deaths over its 60-year operation. The exact number was never made public. In one winter alone, 47 patients died. Causes listed included pneumonia, heart failure, and unknown. No investigations were conducted, no families were notified. Bodies were buried in numbered plots on the grounds. Patients who entered healthy sometimes deteriorated rapidly. Infections spread through overcrowded wards. Malnutrition was common despite the working farm. Some deaths were attributed to the treatments themselves, including insulin shock gone wrong, electroshock causing heart failure, and lobotomy complications. The state called it acceptable loss, the cost of treating difficult patients. For decades, this continued behind closed doors. Then, someone finally looked inside. In 1972, a New York Times reporter named Jack Schwartz gained access to Pilgrim State's back wards, the areas where the most severely ill patients were housed. What he documented shocked the state. Photographs showed patients lying on bare mattresses on the floor with no sheets or blankets. Men and women wandered hallways in hospital gowns so worn they were nearly transparent. Rooms with peeling paint, broken windows, and the overwhelming smell of urine and decay. Staff told Schwartz they did the best they could with what they had. One nurse supervised 60 patients. There was no budget for new clothing. Medications had been cut. The hospital was holding people, not treating them. One image ran on the front page. A man sat alone in a bare room, staring at a wall. He had been there for 18 years. His family had stopped visiting after the first year. The caption read, "Forgotten." The response was immediate. Advocacy groups staged protests outside Pilgrim State's gates. Families who had committed relatives decades earlier demanded to know what had happened to them. Politicians called for investigations. There are over 300 abandoned asylums across America. Most of their stories have never been told. Subscribe and like this video, and we will tell them. But the real pressure came from a broader movement. Across America, similar exposés were revealing that large state psychiatric hospitals had become warehouses of neglect. The civil rights movement was extending to the rights of the mentally ill. In 1963, President Kennedy signed the Community Mental Health Act, envisioning a future where patients received care in their communities, not locked away in institutions. By the 1970s, that vision was becoming policy. states began shutting down their large psychiatric hospitals. Pilgrim State's population dropped from 14,000 in the 1950s to under 2,000 by 1990. In 1994, New York announced Pilgrim State would close entirely. Remaining patients would be transferred to smaller facilities or released to community care programs. The promise was clear: no one would be abandoned, every patient would have somewhere to go. What actually happened was very different. Some patients were transferred to newer, smaller psychiatric facilities. These were the lucky ones. The facilities were still institutions, but they were cleaner, better staffed, and operated under stricter oversight. Some went to group homes, residential facilities meant to provide supported independent living. But there were not enough group homes. Many of those group homes could not handle patients who had been institutionalized for decades. Some returned to families. These were families who had committed their relatives 20, 30, 40 years earlier. Many families had moved on. Some refused to take them back. And many, studies suggest as many as 40%, ended up homeless. They had spent their entire adult lives inside Pilgrim State's walls. They had no job skills, no social connections, no ability to navigate a world that had changed completely since they were admitted. The promise of community-based mental health care never materialized. Funding was cut, clinics closed. The patients who had been released from institutions found themselves on the streets with nowhere to go and no one to help them. This promise never came true. Pilgrim State still exists, but barely. A few buildings remain open, housing around 500 patients. The rest of the campus, over 800 acres, sits abandoned. It is, in many ways, barely there. The main building, a quarter-mile of brick and broken windows, is slowly collapsing. Vines crawl up the walls, trees grow through the roofs. The wards that once held 14,000 people stand empty and silent. Urban explorers who venture inside report finding patient records scattered on floors, medical equipment left to rust, rooms still arranged as if people might return at any moment. The state has debated what to do with the property for decades. Demolition would cost millions. Preservation makes no sense to some. What would you preserve? A monument to failure? So it sits, slowly decaying, a reminder that no one wants to see. On the grounds of Pilgrim State, there is a cemetery. 9,000 patients are buried there. Their graves are marked with numbers, not names. Records of who is buried where were never properly maintained. When families asked about deceased relatives, staff often could not locate the right plot. In 2009, a volunteer group began trying to match names to numbers using old hospital records. They have identified about 800. The rest remain unknown. How many people died unnecessarily at Pilgrim State? How many lobotomies were performed that destroyed lives rather than improved them? Where are the thousands of patients who were released in the 1990s? How many are still alive? How many ended up on the streets? The records that might answer these questions are incomplete, lost, or sealed. The people who could answer them are dead or scattered. The institution itself is crumbling into ruins. Pilgrim State was not an accident, it was a system. A system that believed locking people away was easier than caring for them. A system that called torture treatment. A system that, when it finally collapsed, scattered 13,000 people with nowhere to go. The building stands empty now. The patients are gone. But if you drive past the old asylum grounds today, you can still see the gardens, overgrown now, wild and tangled, but the paths remain. Paths worn into the earth by thousands of feet, walking the same loops day after day, year after year. Patients who had nowhere else to go, nothing else to do but walk. Those paths are traces of a life inside the walls. The paths are still there, faint now, covered in leaves, but visible if you look closely. Evidence of lives lived in circles. Evidence that people were here, evidence that they existed. 9,000 of them are buried in numbered graves, their names forgotten, their families gone, the records lost. The question is not whether we remember what happened at Pilgrim State. The question is whether we ever really knew. If this story affected you, please leave a comment below. What do you think should be done with places like this? Should they be preserved as reminders, or does letting them decay serve a purpose? If you want to see more of these forgotten histories, subscribe. There are dozens of asylums with stories like this, and we are just getting started.